The parking garage on the lower level of the Harman and Voss Financial Tower smelled like motor oil and stale concrete, the kind of smell that seeped into your clothes if you stood still long enough. It was 7:43 in the morning, and Marcus Dell was already late. He moved through the rows of cars with his head down, a canvas tool bag over one shoulder and a half-finished cup of gas station coffee in his left hand. He was 38 years old, with broad shoulders that curved slightly inward from years of bending under hoods, and hands that bore the faint chemical stains of a man who had spent 2 decades doing work that other people preferred not to think about. His hair was dark and cut close to his skull, and there were shallow lines at the corners of his eyes that made him look older than he was, or perhaps exactly as old as the last 7 years had made him feel. He wore his gray work uniform with his employee badge clipped at the chest, a battered pair of steel-toed boots that had been resoled twice, and a watch that had belonged to his father, the crystal scratched but the mechanism sound. He was the chief maintenance technician for the building's HVAC and mechanical systems, a title that fit on a badge but said almost nothing about what the job actually required. He had taken the position 3 years ago after his previous employer had folded, and he had kept it because it paid reliably, because the building was close enough to his son's school, and because no one bothered him much as long as the systems ran. In practice, this meant that Marcus Dell was the reason the building stayed at 68 degrees in July, and that the water pressure on the 32nd floor didn't plummet every time 3 people flushed in sequence, and that the freight elevator's hydraulic seals didn't fail during deliveries. It meant he was the one who read the system logs every morning before the coffee had fully cooled, and who kept a notebook of minor anomalies the way a doctor keeps notes on symptoms that might not matter yet but then again might. None of this was visible from the outside. What was visible, to someone who did not know him, was a man in a gray uniform walking through a parking garage with a tool bag over his shoulder. He was cutting through the executive parking level because it was 2 minutes faster than the elevator route from the side entrance, and he was already 2 minutes behind. He did not pay attention to the cars as he walked past them. He registered them only as obstacles, shapes in the dim halogen light that he navigated out of habit rather than attention. He was thinking about the secondary compressor on the 41st floor, which had been making a sound like a loose bearing since the previous Thursday. He had ordered the replacement part himself, filed the work order in the system, and left 3 separate notes on Gerald Roach's desk asking for a 2-hour maintenance window to complete the repair. None of his notes had been acknowledged. The bearing would continue to deteriorate. At some point it would fail entirely, and then the floor's HVAC would go down, and Gerald would call him with the urgency of a man who had not understood any of the warnings, and Marcus would fix it without saying anything about the 3 notes. He was still thinking about this when his boot caught the lip of a low parking barrier and his coffee lurched forward. He reached out instinctively with his left hand, pressing his palm flat against the rear quarter panel of the car directly to his right to catch his balance. He straightened immediately, checked his palm, saw the faint smear of his hand against the dark metallic finish, and reached into his bag for a clean rag without pausing. He was wiping the smear away when the footsteps came. There were 4 of them, and they moved fast across the concrete. He heard the heels first, sharp and deliberate, then a voice that did not ask a question so much as issue a declaration with the compressed certainty of someone who had long ago stopped differentiating between the two. "Get away from that car." Marcus turned. The woman standing 10 feet away was somewhere in her mid-40s, sharp-featured, with dark brown hair pulled back with a precision that suggested her mornings began before most people's. She wore a charcoal blazer over a silk blouse the color of cream and carried a leather portfolio under one arm. Behind her stood 2 men in dark suits and a younger woman with a tablet, all 3 of them frozen in the particular posture of people who were calculating whether to step forward or stay back and had elected to stay back. The woman in the blazer did not appear to be calculating anything. She had already arrived at her conclusion. She was Renata Voss. Marcus had never spoken to her, but he had seen her photograph in the building's lobby display case and in the quarterly newsletter that appeared in the break room every 3 months. She was the chief executive of Harman and Voss Asset Management, 44th floor, the kind of name that appeared on glass doors and on legal documents and almost never in the maintenance logs that Marcus read every morning. He knew, from the newsletter, that she had taken over the firm 12 years ago at 32, following the departure of her predecessor under circumstances the newsletter described as a transition of leadership, and that under her direction the firm had grown its assets under management by 400%. He also knew, because the maintenance logs went back further than anyone usually bothered to read, that she had twice requested and twice been denied an upgrade to the HVAC controls in her suite, citing her personal sensitivity to temperature variations, and that both denials had come from a building management committee that no longer existed in its previous form. None of this was relevant to the present moment. He set these facts aside. "I wasn't doing anything to it," Marcus said. He held up the rag. "I stumbled. I was cleaning the mark off." Renata Voss looked at the rag. She looked at him. She looked at his bag, his uniform, his hands. There was a particular quality to her examination, not cruel exactly, but comprehensive in a way that reduced the person being examined to a set of visible characteristics to be weighed against a threshold. The result of this examination was complete in approximately 2 seconds. "Security," she said, and one of the suited men was already reaching for a radio. "I work here," Marcus said. "I'm the mechanical technician. I have a badge." He reached for it. "I don't care what you have," she said. "I care that you were touching my car on a restricted level without prior notice or authorization. I spilled coffee. I was cleaning it off. The mark is gone. Building maintenance does not have unaccompanied authorization to be on this level outside scheduled windows." Marcus looked at her. He was a man who had learned, over many years and at some cost, the difference between the moments that required him to speak and the moments that required him to be silent. He had learned this the way most people learn it, which is to say imperfectly and after several occasions on which he had not yet learned it. He reached into his shirt pocket, found his employee badge, and held it out without speaking. One of the suited men stepped forward, took it, examined it, and returned it to Renata Voss. She glanced at the badge with the particular attention of someone looking at a thing they have already categorized. She handed it back to the suited man, who brought it back to Marcus. "Escort him to the lobby," she said to the security desk over the radio. "And I want a call with facilities today. This level needs restricted access protocols reviewed by end of business." The suited men exchanged a glance that lasted less than a second. The woman with the tablet looked at her screen. Renata Voss walked past Marcus to her car, circled the rear of the vehicle, examined the panel where his hand had been, found nothing she could point to as damage, and got in without looking at him again. Marcus walked to the elevator. The security guard who caught up with him in the lobby was a man named Terrell, whom Marcus knew because Terrell had once called him at 11 at night about a flooding issue in the mechanical room, and Terrell was apologetic in the way of a man carrying out instructions he found personally distasteful. He said he was sorry about this. Marcus said there was nothing for him to be sorry about. He clocked in at 7:51 and went directly to the 41st floor. He did not mention the encounter to anyone. This was not a decision he made consciously. It was simply the way Marcus operated. The things that happened to him were his to carry or to set down, and for the time being there was no value in carrying this one into the workplace. He had work to do. The bearing on the compressor needed his attention. Gerald Roach had still not responded to any of his 3 notes. The day had a shape to it already, and the encounter in the parking garage fit nowhere in that shape. There was, however, a thing that Marcus had noticed. He had noticed it in the 2 seconds between catching himself against the car and hearing Renata Voss's voice, in the automatic way that 20 years of reading machinery had trained him to notice things before he consciously knew he was noticing them. It was a sound. A thin, intermittent, high-frequency tone, almost below the audible threshold, cycling in an irregular pattern from somewhere in the undercarriage of the car. Could have been interference from another system. Could have been a loose heat shield. It was probably nothing. But Marcus's brain had catalogued it with the same involuntary precision with which it had once catalogued a faint vibration in an elevator shaft 3 weeks before the shaft brake developed a failure that could have dropped the car 4 floors. He filed the sound in the back of his mind and went to work on the compressor. His son's name was Dominic, and he was 8 years old, and he was sitting on the front steps of Kellerman Road Elementary School when Marcus pulled up at 4 minutes past 3 that afternoon. Dominic was small for his age, built like his father but scaled down, with his father's dark complexion and hair and a nose that turned slightly upward at the end in a way that had come from his mother's side. He wore a blue quilted jacket that was half a size too large because Marcus had bought it with the expectation that Dominic would grow into it by February. His backpack sat beside him on the step with the careful placement of a child, who had been given instructions about where to put things and had taken those instructions seriously. In his right hand, held with the casual certainty of a child who does not think of the things he carries because they are simply always there, was a small yellow rubber dinosaur. It was a brachiosaurus, approximately 3 inches in length, with a chip missing from its left rear leg where it had struck the iron railing of a fire escape the previous spring. The dinosaur had been a gift from Marcus's mother the previous Christmas, chosen after Dominic had spent 20 minutes in her kitchen explaining the differences between sauropods. He had named it Benny on the drive home and had carried it with him every day since then, which was now 11 months. Dominic got into the passenger seat, placed Benny on the dashboard in front of him, adjusted the angle of Benny's neck so that it was tilted slightly to the left and forward, which was the specific orientation he always used and which he maintained with the consistency of someone following a procedure, and reported, without preamble, that he had received a perfect score on his spelling test and that his teacher Mrs. Pellman had asked him to check his answers again because she didn't think the score was actually his. "She thought you cheated?" Marcus asked. "She didn't say that," Dominic said. "She said maybe I should double-check because sometimes we make mistakes and don't see them." "But you didn't make mistakes." "No," Dominic said. "My answers were right." "And when you checked?" "They were still right." Marcus drove. At the light on Granger Avenue, Dominic reached over without announcement and made a slight adjustment to Benny's position on the dashboard, rotating the neck perhaps 3 degrees to the right. He settled back against his seat. "Dad," he said. "Yeah. Do you think brachiosauruses actually liked water, or did they just live near it?" Marcus thought about this. "I think animals usually end up near the things they need," he said. "That's not the same as liking it." "No," Marcus agreed. "It isn't." Dominic looked out the window. After a moment he said, "I think Benny likes water. He has a calm face." Marcus said that was a reasonable conclusion. They ate dinner at the kitchen table. Marcus made pasta from a box and heated canned tomatoes and grated the block of cheese he kept on the second shelf of the refrigerator. The meal was not remarkable, but it was consistent, which Dominic appeared to understand on some level as a form of reliability. Dominic talked through dinner about the spelling test, about a boy named Troy who had a remote-controlled car that could supposedly do 45 miles per hour, about whether it was mathematically possible for a brachiosaurus to have outrun a predator even on flat ground. Marcus responded to each of these in order, and when Dominic moved to the next one without waiting for a complete answer, Marcus followed without comment. After dinner, Marcus helped with the reading worksheet and the math review and then read 2 chapters of a book about deep-sea exploration, which Dominic had requested specifically because it had a chapter about an anglerfish which he found, in his words, appropriately terrifying. At 8:15 Marcus turned off the bedside light. Dominic said good night. Marcus said good night. Dominic looked at Benny on the nightstand and said good night to Benny, and this was how every night ended, with Benny facing the wall at a slight angle that Dominic had also calibrated and that Marcus had been asked on one occasion to maintain during an evening when Dominic was sleeping over at a friend's house. Marcus sat at the kitchen table after the apartment had gone quiet. He had a glass of water and his laptop. He pulled up the building's maintenance contract records and located the service agreement for the executive parking garage's ventilation system, which ran under a separate facilities vendor and which technically fell outside Marcus's department, though he had read the contract twice because the system interfaced with the central HVAC on the 3rd subbasement level and the interface points were his responsibility. He also looked up the model number of the vehicle he had touched, which he had retained involuntarily the same way he retained the serial numbers of machines he worked on regularly. He found the manufacturer's diagnostic bulletin database, which was publicly available, and searched it for the sound he had heard. He read for 50 minutes. He found, on the 4th search variation he tried, a bulletin from 14 months earlier describing a fault in the thermal preconditioning controller of that specific model generation. Under certain conditions, the bulletin said, the controller could misidentify engine state after a brief auto-start cycle, resulting in continued carbon monoxide output in enclosed environments. The bulletin had been issued as a service advisory, not a recall. Owners were advised to schedule a software update at their next maintenance visit. Marcus read the bulletin 3 times. Then he closed the laptop and went to bed. He did not sleep immediately. He lay with his eyes open in the dark of his bedroom for a time, listening to the sounds of the building around him, the pipes settling, a door somewhere below, the traffic on the street 2 blocks over arriving in a faint continuous wash. He was thinking about what he knew and what he was not certain of and what the difference between those two things required of him. Eventually he made the decision that he had already made, which was the only decision that was actually available to him, and he went to sleep. He arrived at the Harmon and Voss Tower at 7:32 the following morning, 11 minutes earlier than his scheduled clock-in. He went first to the mechanical room adjacent to the parking structure and pulled the ventilation intake logs for the executive parking level, which were printed automatically each morning and left in a binder that no one besides Marcus appeared to read. He reviewed the logs for the past 6 days. There were 2 anomalies in the exhaust cycling data from the previous 3 mornings. The secondary fan's intake readings showed reduced flow beginning at approximately 7:20 each day, which was consistent with the damper actuator on the secondary exhaust circuit not cycling fully open. He photographed both pages. Then he filed a maintenance request for the secondary exhaust actuator, marked it priority 2, and went to begin his regular shift. The alarm came at 10:47. It rang through the building's internal emergency line, which connected first to Gerald Roach's office but simultaneously sent an alert to Marcus's pager by protocol, because Marcus held the only dual certification in the building for both mechanical systems and emergency atmospheric response. Gerald picked up and called Marcus on the radio within 45 seconds. CO sensor on P1 south wall, Gerald said. He had the voice of a man who was presenting information and hoping someone else would tell him what it meant. Could be a bad sensor. We had one false alarm on that system about 8 months ago. Could be, Marcus said. He was already moving toward the stairwell. What's the reading? 43 parts per million as of 2 minutes ago. Don't send anyone down. I'll clear it first. He took the stairwell because it was faster than the elevator and because he wanted to feel the air in the stairwell as he descended, checking for any draft that would tell him how the pressure gradient was moving. The air in the stairwell was normal. He came through the door to the executive level at 10:51 with the calibrated CO monitor clipped to his shirt and a second bag he had grabbed from the mechanical room. The level was empty. The halogen lights ran in their usual rows. Marcus stopped at the entrance and waited while the monitor's reading stabilized. 43 parts per million. He let it run for 6 seconds. 44. He noted the direction. He walked to the ventilation panel on the south wall and confirmed that the secondary exhaust fan was not cycling. He could see without tools that the indicator light on the actuator control was showing amber rather than green, which meant the damper had not received a confirmed open signal. He walked the perimeter slowly, watching the monitor. The readings climbed incrementally toward the northeast corner of the level, where a single dark vehicle sat alone in the space marked with the executive reserved placard. He knew the car. He had touched this car yesterday. The engine was not running, but the preconditioning system was active. He could hear the faint electrical hum of it from 3 feet away, and he could see the small status light on the dashboard that indicated cabin thermal management was in operation. According to the service bulletin he had read the previous evening, under the fault condition described, the system would have initiated a brief engine cycle sometime before 7:30 to accelerate cabin cooling, misidentified the shutdown, and continued to signal the emission system as active. The exhaust pathway in an enclosed space with a stuck damper had nowhere to go. Marcus set both bags down, unclipped the ventilation emergency override key from his belt, and walked to the north wall panel. He opened it with the key, engaged the full exhaust override on both the primary and secondary circuits, and then located the manual damper release lever on the secondary circuit housing, which was behind a small access panel secured by a hex bolt. He had the right bit on his belt. He opened the panel, pulled the manual lever to the full open position, and heard the secondary fan engage with a sound like something that had been holding its breath finally exhaling. He watched the monitor. 43, 42, 39, 37. He called Gerald. Damper actuator on the secondary exhaust failed to cycle, he said. I've engaged both circuits on manual override. The CO is dropping. You need to contact the owner of the vehicle in executive reserved. There's a known software fault in the preconditioning controller. The car needs to come out of here and go directly to a service facility before anyone uses it. Understood, Gerald said. I'll look up the registration. Marcus stayed on the level until the monitor read 14 parts per million, then walked the perimeter a second time, taking readings at 6 points and noting them in his notebook with the time. He noted the time at which he had entered, the time at which the fan engaged, the time at which the reading began to fall and the rate of fall. He noted the model and partial plate of the vehicle. He noted the ambient temperature and the status of both fan circuits before and after the override. He noted everything. Gerald called back at 11:19. "The car belongs to Renata Voss," Gerald said. Marcus looked at the northeast corner of the level. He looked at the car. "She's in a board presentation until noon," Gerald said. "I know," Marcus said. He did not know why he said this. He supposed he meant that he understood the situation. He completed the atmospheric documentation, filed a preliminary incident report with exact timestamps and CO readings attached, flagged the damper actuator as requiring immediate replacement, and noted that the vehicle should not be returned to this level until the manufacturer's software update had been confirmed in writing. He sent all of this to Gerald and to the building's safety coordinator, whose name was Patricia, and who responded within 4 minutes with a red receipt and a message that said she was forwarding to legal. Marcus went to eat his lunch at his workbench on the 3rd floor. At 12:48, the internal messaging system produced a request asking him to report to the executive conference room on 44 at 1:15. He finished his lunch. He washed his thermos in the utility sink. He straightened the tools on his workbench in the order he would need them for the afternoon's tasks. He took the elevator to 44 at 1:13. The conference room ran the full width of the building's north face, and through its glass wall the city was visible under a flat gray sky, the river a dull silver thread at the far edge of view. Renata Voss sat at the head of the long table. She had changed her blazer, or perhaps the light was different. The 2 suited men from the parking garage occupied chairs along one side. Gerald Roach sat near the door with his hands folded on his knees, which was the posture Gerald assumed in rooms where he was uncertain what was expected of him. A woman Marcus had not previously seen sat at the corner with a legal pad and a pen held ready, which meant she was from counsel. Marcus sat in the chair across from Gerald. He set his notebook on the table and his pen beside it. Renata Voss looked at him. In the daylight from the window, without the urgency of the parking garage or the authority of her entourage, she looked like what she actually was, a person under considerable sustained pressure who had been under it long enough that it had become her resting expression. She was not unkind. He revised his assessment from the morning before. She had not been unkind in the parking garage either, not precisely. She had been fast and certain and wrong, which was a different thing. "Mr. Dell," she said. "Ms. Voss, I understand you were the one who responded to the CO alert this morning." "I was." "And that you identified the fault in the ventilation system. The damper actuator on the secondary exhaust had failed to cycle to the open position. It's a mechanical wear issue, not a design defect. The part needs replacement." "And the car?" "The preconditioning controller has a known software fault in that model generation. The manufacturer issued a service bulletin 14 months ago. It's a software update at an authorized service facility. The car shouldn't be operated in an enclosed environment until that's done." One of the suited men wrote something on the pad in front of him. Renata Voss was quiet for a moment. Gerald looked at the table. The woman from counsel held her pen still. "Yesterday morning," Renata Voss said, "when I found you near my vehicle." "Yes." She appeared to be choosing words with the careful attention of someone who did not often have to choose them this carefully. "I made an assumption about what you were doing and why you were there," she said. "That was not correct." Marcus waited. "I responded in a way that was not appropriate to the situation," she said. "And I want to say that directly." It was not quite a complete apology. He could see the distance between what she was saying and what a full apology would have required, and he could see that she could see it too, and that she was attempting to close it. He noted the attempt. "You couldn't have known who I was or what I was doing there," Marcus said. "I should not have responded the way I did regardless of what I thought I knew," she said. "That part one want to be clear about." He looked at her across the table. She met his eyes and held them, which was not the behavior of someone saying the minimum required. He decided to accept what she was offering, not because it was everything but because it was offered honestly. The damper actuator needs replacing, Marcus said. I can handle that this afternoon. The car will need to go to a dealer or authorized facility for the software update. I can put together the documentation for your assistant so the service request is clear about what bulletin they're working from. Please, she said, and I'd like you to handle the actuator directly. I'll start this afternoon. He stood. He picked up his notebook and his pen. Mr. Dell, she said. He paused. I want to have a longer conversation, she said, about maintenance protocols and about how this building supports the people who actually run its systems. That's a conversation I've been avoiding for 2 years, and I'd like to stop avoiding it. Marcus looked at her. He did not know yet if she meant this or if it was the kind of thing people said in the room where they had just needed to be gracious. He gave her the benefit of the doubt because he had learned that people sometimes became what they said they wanted to be, if you did not foreclose the possibility. I'm available when you are, he said. He left. Gerald caught the elevator with him and stood in silence for 3 floors before saying that he thought Marcus had handled that very professionally. Marcus said thank you. Gerald said he had been meaning to respond to the notes about the compressor bearing and he was sorry he hadn't. Marcus said it was done now. Gerald nodded. The actuator replacement took 94 minutes. Marcus documented every step. The email arrived Thursday morning, routed to his work inbox from an address he did not initially recognize. He looked at it for a moment before he understood it was her direct address and not an assistant's relay. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained 6 words. I want to say this properly. Below them was an attachment. He opened the attachment. It was a letter, single page, on formal Harmon and Voss letterhead, dated that morning. It was addressed to him by name, first and last. It described the morning of the CO alarm in precise and direct language. It attributed to him specifically the actions he had taken, each one named, the identification of the ventilation fault from the intake logs, the timely response to the alarm, the manual override of both exhaust circuits, the identification of the vehicle's software fault, the complete documentation of the incident. It said that his technical knowledge had prevented a serious atmospheric incident in a building with hundreds of occupants. It said that his competence in this matter was not merely adequate but exceptional. Then it said that the previous morning, in the parking garage, she had assessed a situation rapidly and incorrectly, and had responded in a way that did not meet the standards she held for herself or for the organization she led. It said that she had treated him as something other than what he was, which was a skilled professional in his own domain, and that this treatment was not something she could attribute to the stress of her morning or the speed of her assumption or any other mitigating circumstance, because none of those circumstances altered what she had done. Said she was sorry. Not sorry for a misunderstanding. Sorry to him. The last paragraph said she would like to meet with him and Gerald Roach and the facilities director to discuss structural improvements to the way the building supported its maintenance staff, and that she was asking not as a formality but because she believed the conversation was necessary and had been necessary for some time. Marcus read the letter twice at his workbench. He printed it on the break room printer and read it a 3rd time. He folded it along the original crease lines and placed it in the inner pocket of his canvas bag, next to the notebook where he recorded the things that mattered. He wrote a reply in 3 sentences. He accepted the meeting. He thanked her for the letter and said it was precisely what it needed to be. He went back to work. The meeting happened the following week. It lasted an hour and 40 minutes. Marcus brought his notebook. By the end of it, there were 7 items on a written action list with assigned owners and target dates. The second item, which had been his idea, was a direct communication protocol between senior maintenance staff and department heads for time-sensitive system concerns, bypassing the facilities coordinator queue for flagged issues. Renata Voss had written it down herself. The thing that Marcus had not planned for, and could not have arranged, happened on the Friday of the week after the letter. He had asked Dominic's after-school program to allow him to pick up late on Fridays twice a month when his shift ran long, and on this particular Friday, the program was closed for a teacher professional development day, which meant that at 4:45, Dominic was sitting on the bench in the main lobby of the Harmon and Voss Financial Tower with his backpack on the floor beside his feet and Benny held in his right hand, examining the small rubber dinosaur with the focused attention of someone performing an investigation. Renata Voss came through the lobby from the elevator bank at 4:52. She was carrying her portfolio and moving at the pace of someone whose afternoon had exceeded its expected length. She slowed when she saw the boy on the bench. Dominic looked up. He was not startled. He assessed her with the direct and uncomplicated attention of a child who extends trust readily and has not yet been given enough reasons to do otherwise. "Are you waiting for someone?" she asked. "My dad," Dominic said. "He works here. He said he had one more thing to check and I should wait here and not talk to people I don't know." "That's sensible advice," she said. "I know," he said. He returned his attention to Benny with the decisive composure of a child who has completed an interaction. She stood there a moment longer than she had intended to. "What are you looking at?" she asked. "Benny," he said. He held up the small yellow dinosaur so she could see it. "He's a brachiosaurus. His leg has a chip in it from when he fell." She looked at the chip on the left rear leg. "Does it bother him?" Dominic considered this with what appeared to be genuine deliberation. His eyes went to Benny's small molded face, to the angle of the neck, to the direction the dinosaur appeared to be oriented toward. "No," he said. "He always looks forward. He doesn't look back at it." Renata Voss was quiet. She was a person who had not been at a loss for a response in many years, and she stood in the lobby of her own building at 4:53 on a Friday afternoon with nothing to say to a child holding a chipped rubber dinosaur, and she felt the absence of words not as an embarrassment but as something more honest than that. Marcus came through the access door from the maintenance corridor 38 seconds later. He saw Dominic on the bench, registered the position of his backpack, registered that he was unharmed and composed, and then registered the woman standing 2 feet from him. He stopped. There was a moment of complete stillness. Not the stillness of confrontation, but the stillness of two separate contexts colliding in a space too small for both of them to occupy separately. "Ms. Voss," Marcus said. "Mr. Dell," she said. She looked from him to the boy and back. Something moved across her face that had no professional category, some small recalibration. "This is my son," Marcus said. "Dominic." Dominic stood and picked up his backpack with both hands, settling the straps in the practiced motion of a child who had been doing this since kindergarten. He held Benny at his side. He looked at Renata Voss with polite curiosity and waited to see if anything further was required of him. "We were talking about Benny," she said, and her voice had something in it that had not been there in the conference room. "He goes everywhere," Dominic said, in the tone of someone providing clarifying context. Renata Voss looked at Marcus. She said, "I'm glad you were here. Both mornings." She held his gaze for a moment. Then, "Good evening, Mr. Dell." "Good evening, Dominic." Dominic said good evening with the formality of a child who takes his cues from the register of the adult. Marcus said good evening. He put his hand on his son's shoulder and they walked to the revolving door and threw it into the early evening air, which was cold now and clear, the cloud cover that had been heavy all week having finally thinned and given way to a sky that was turning from gray to the particular pale dark blue of late autumn at 6 o'clock. They walked to the car. Dominic climbed in and settled into his seat and placed Benny on the dashboard in the specific orientation, neck angled left and slightly forward, attending the road ahead with whatever attention a small rubber brachiosaurus could be said to bring to bear on the world in front of him. "Who was that?" Dominic asked. "Someone I work with," Marcus said. He started the engine. "She seemed serious." "She is." Dominic looked at Benny. He made a small adjustment to the angle of the neck, a degree or two to the right, then left it. "She asked if Benny's chip bothered him," he said. "What did you tell her?" "That he always looks forward." Dominic said it without particular emphasis, the way he said things that seemed obvious to him. "He doesn't look back at it." Marcus looked at the dashboard. He looked at Benny's small molded face, the forward angle of the neck, the chipped rear leg turned slightly away from view. He thought about what it meant to carry the things you carry and still face the direction you are going. He thought about 7 years of that. He thought about a parking garage and a letter folded in his bag and a meeting with 7 items and assigned owners and target dates. He thought about the way some things accumulate into something that you do not have a name for while it is happening and only recognize afterward. He pulled out of the lot and onto the street. At the first red light, Dominic asked if they could have pasta for dinner, and Marcus said yes. At the second light, Dominic asked if Marcus thought that brachiosauruses were calmer than other dinosaurs by nature or just because they were so large that smaller problems didn't register, and Marcus said he thought it was probably both, that size changed what you noticed. Dominic said that made sense. He said that Benny was small but still pretty calm, which suggested it was also a personality thing. Marcus said that seemed right. They came into the apartment and Marcus put the water on and got the pasta and the tomatoes and the block of cheese, and Dominic sat at the kitchen table and set Benny in front of him in the place Benny occupied at dinner, facing the kitchen, positioned at the edge of the table in the specific spot where the light from the window fell in such a way that Benny appeared to be lit from the left side. This was not something Dominic had ever articulated. It was simply something he knew. Dominic talked while Marcus cooked. He talked about the spelling test and about Troy's remote control car and about the lady in the lobby and about whether dinosaurs had preferred rivers or open ocean, which was a new question that had evolved from the previous question about whether they liked water, and Marcus contributed to each of these threads as the pasta boiled and the tomatoes heated and the kitchen filled with the warm smell of cooking and the sound of his son's voice, which was the sound of the apartment being inhabited, rather than merely occupied. They ate. Dominic finished his serving and asked for more and Marcus gave him more. Outside the window, the street light on the corner had come on, and its orange light fell across the table in a thin diagonal, crossing Benny's small form, crossing Dominic's hands, crossing the edge of Marcus's plate. Dominic told Benny that it had been a good day, which was the thing he said to Benny at the end of days that had been, in his assessment, good. He did not say it every day. He said it when he meant it. Marcus noted this, as he noted the other things that mattered in this apartment on this street in this city, with the same quiet precision he brought to everything. Without performance, without sentiment that exceeded the actual weight of the moment, and without any need to say out loud what the moment was. The dishes went into the sink. The water went off. The light outside deepened from orange to a thick dark blue. Dominic carried Benny from the table to the hallway to his bedroom in the sequence of winding down that they had developed together over 8 years, and Marcus followed, and read the chapters from the deep-sea book and turned off the light and said goodnight, and Dominic said goodnight, and Benny was positioned on the nightstand at the calibrated angle facing the wall, the chipped leg turned away, the neck pointed forward into the dark. Marcus stood in the hallway for a moment after the door was mostly closed. Then he went back to the kitchen and poured the last of the water from the pot down the drain and wiped the counter and put the cheese back in the refrigerator on the second shelf. He sat at the table and opened his notebook to a new page. He drew a horizontal line across the top the way he always did when he was beginning a new entry, and below it he wrote the date and the time, and then he sat for a moment with the pen held loosely above the page. He did not write anything else. The page remained mostly empty below the date, which was unusual for him. He looked at it for a while. Then he closed the notebook and left it on the table and turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. In the morning he would be back in the building at 7:30, and the maintenance log would be waiting, and the 7 action items from the meeting would need following up, and the system would be running because that was what systems did when someone who understood them was paying attention. But that was morning. Tonight, the apartment was quiet, and the streetlight pressed its thin orange line through the kitchen window onto the empty table, onto the place where Benny had been, and outside. The city moved in its usual way, indifferent and continuous, and somewhere in the dark of his room Dominic breathed evenly in his sleep, one hand likely curled toward the nightstand, toward the small chipped dinosaur that looked forward no matter what.